Tonight, you and that secret will disappear together. A hoarse voice echoed through the sea breeze. Clara backed against a shipping container, clutching a folder of documents, her breathing ragged. 3 men closed in, yellow lights revealing their contemptuous smiles. The family paid to clean up this mess. You understand? Clara choked. Please, don't. A rough hand grabbed her arm violently. The sound of steel striking steel. The hand was knocked away forcefully. Lucas, single dad and former SEAL, stepped forward, eyes like steel. He growled, "Try touching her and see." No one knew that this moment would drag them both into a life-or-death battle where the Moretti family secrets would finally be exposed. Clara Moretti, 32 years old, young CEO of the Moretti Corporation, hair pulled back in a tight bun, face cold, but eyes haunted. She lived under the shadow of a powerful dynasty, but always suspected her father's death wasn't an accident. After months of secret investigation, Clara found a hidden file, evidence that her father had been murdered. Just as she uncovered this, the family discovered her investigation and hired people to clean up the mess, leading to the attack at the harbor. The man who appeared to save her that night was Lucas Kane, 39 years old, former Navy SEAL, now working dock labor and security at the port. He was lean and weathered, hands calloused, eyes sharp and cold, but always gentle with Sophie, his 6-year-old daughter. After the men retreated, Clara still trembled, asking, "Who are you?" Lucas answered briefly, "A father, and someone who once knew what it's like to be hunted." Clara tried to offer money and thanks, but he shook his head. "You need somewhere safe more than I need money." The next day, Clara came to Lucas's small apartment to return the knife he'd left behind. The apartment was old and worn, but filled with a child's laughter. Sophie ran out, holding up a scribbled drawing. "Daddy and me, we just need a mommy." Clara froze, her hand trembling as she touched the paper, feeling something foreign yet warm. The attack at the harbor had been professional. Clara recognized the signs. These weren't random thugs, but trained enforcers. Her family had sent them. Lucas had materialized from the shadows like a ghost, his movements precise and economical. Years of military training were evident in how he'd neutralized the threats without wasted motion. "You should have stayed down," one of the attackers had snarled after Lucas disarmed him. "And you should have chosen better employers," Lucas had replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Clara had watched in stunned silence as this ordinary-looking dock worker dismantled 3 armed men with the efficiency of a trained killer. When it was over, he'd helped her up with surprising gentleness. "Can you walk?" I think so." "Good. We need to move. They'll send more." That night, Lucas had taken her to a safe house, nothing more than a storage unit converted into a basic shelter. He'd given her water, checked her for injuries, and asked no questions about why people wanted her dead. "Why are you helping me?" Clara had finally asked. "Because I know what it's like when your own people turn on you." The cryptic answer had stayed with her. Now, standing in his modest apartment watching his daughter show her childish drawings, Clara began to understand that Lucas Kane had his own demons. Sophie's drawing showed 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Daddy, a small one labeled Me, and an empty space with a question mark. "That's for the mommy I don't have yet," Sophie explained, with the matter-of-fact tone of children discussing profound truth. "Daddy says she'll come when we're ready." Clara felt something crack inside her carefully constructed walls. This child had experienced loss. Her mother was conspicuously absent, yet still believed in the possibility of family. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Clara said, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. "You can keep it if you want. Daddy says gifts are special when you make them yourself." A trace of authenticity, Sophie's scribbled drawing showing Daddy, Me, and Mommy. A child's vision of the family she wanted, with space deliberately left for someone yet to arrive. As Clara left that afternoon, Lucas walked her to the door. "They'll come for you again," he said quietly. "Whatever you found, they want it buried. Along with you." "I know, but I can't run anymore. My father deserves justice." Lucas nodded slowly, understanding that kind of determination. "Then you'll need someone who knows how to fight that kind of war." "Are you offering?" "I'm saying that if you're determined to see this through, You don't have to do it alone. Clara looked at this man who'd saved her life without knowing anything about her, who lived simply with his daughter in a modest apartment, who seemed to understand loss and betrayal on a visceral level. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger? Lucas glanced back at Sophie, who was already working on another drawing. Because I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Clara began seeking out Lucas more often, using wanting to thank him as an excuse, but really because she felt safe there. In the small kitchen, the three of them sat at the table for the first time, yellow light casting shadows on the worn walls. Lucas quietly prepared soup, the simple aroma something Clara had never tasted in her life of luxury. Sophie chirped, "Miss Clara, can I call you Mommy?" Clara choked up, forcing a smile. Lucas looked at his daughter, then at Clara, saying softly, "She only says what her heart wants." Clara shared her story. She was being forced to sign a political marriage contract to consolidate the corporation's power. The family refused to acknowledge the truth that her father was murdered. They wanted to bury the evidence. Lucas told his story. He'd lost comrades when a superior betrayed them during a classified mission. That's when he left the military. Silence settled over them, only the sound of spoons against bowls remaining. The next morning, Sophie brought out her first pancake, burned at the edges, black as coal. Clara hesitantly tried it, then burst out laughing. "It's crunchy like steel." Sophie cheered while Lucas sighed. Stubborn just like her father. For the first time, the laughter of all three rang out, erasing the darkness outside. Over the following weeks, Clara's visits became routine. She'd arrive after work, trading her designer suits for comfortable clothes Lucas lent her, an oversized sweater, worn jeans that had to be rolled up. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," she said one evening. "You look more real," Lucas observed. Sophie had taken to Clara immediately, with the unfiltered acceptance only children possess. She'd show Clara her toys, teach her games, and casually include her in bedtime routines as if she'd always been there. "Can Clara read me a story tonight?" Sophie asked one evening. Lucas glanced at Clara, who nodded eagerly. As she read from a worn children's book, Sophie nestled against her, and Clara felt something she'd never experienced, the simple trust of a child who believed in her goodness. After Sophie fell asleep, Lucas and Clara talked on the small balcony overlooking the industrial harbor. "Tell me about the mission," Clara said, "the one that made you leave." Lucas was quiet for a long time. "We were sent to extract a target in hostile territory, but someone on our side had been bought. Set us up. 3 good men died because someone decided their lives were worth less than money. I'm sorry. I survived because I was lucky, but I couldn't stay in a system where people I trusted could sell out my brothers for profit, so I walked away." Clara understood that betrayal on a cellular level. "My father was killed by his own family. His brother Marco orchestrated it to take control of the company. I found proof, but the family chose to protect Marco rather than seek justice. Blood doesn't mean loyalty," Lucas said. "I learned that the hard way." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who understood betrayal and loss in ways most people never would. "Lucas," Clara said eventually, "why did you really help me that night? You didn't know who I was or what I'd done. I saw someone being hunted by people more powerful than them. I've been that person. No one helped me when I needed it most, so I help when I can." The simple honesty of his answer made Clara's eyes sting with tears. One afternoon, while Sophie was at a friend's house, Clara helped Lucas with repairs around the apartment. As they worked side by side, Clara found herself studying him. The economy of his movements, the quiet competence, the way he approached problems with calm analysis rather than panic. "You're staring," Lucas said without looking up from the pipe he was fixing. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "What are you observing?" "That you're nothing like the men in my world. They're all performance and strategy. You just are." Lucas finally looked at her. "Your world sounds exhausting." "It is. I've been performing my entire life. CEO, dutiful daughter, strategic asset. I don't know who I actually am underneath all that. Maybe that's something worth discovering." That evening, Sophie insisted Clara stay for her special dinner. which consisted of sandwiches cut into shapes and apple slices arranged to look like smiles. "This is fancy dining," Sophie announced proudly. "It's the fanciest dinner I've ever had," Clara said, meaning it completely. After dinner, Sophie showed Clara a memory box she kept, photos of her mother, small trinkets, a letter Lucas had written for her to read when she was older. "Mommy died when I was a baby," Sophie explained with the matter-of-fact tone children use for painful truths. "But Daddy says she's still with us in memories." "Your daddy's right. Do you have someone like that? Someone who's gone but still here?" Clara thought of her father, murdered for his principles. "Yes, I do." "Then we're the same. We both remember people who loved us, a trace of authenticity. Sophie's burned pancake that she made herself, which Clara ate completely while praising her cooking skills, both knowing it was terrible but sharing the moment anyway. That night, as Clara prepared to leave, Lucas walked her to her car. "You're welcome here anytime," he said. "Sophie's already attached to you." And honestly, so am I. The admission hung in the air between them. "I'm in danger, Lucas. People close to me end up as targets too. I spent 20 years being a target. I know how to handle it. This is different. This is my family. They're powerful and ruthless. Then it's a good thing I'm both of those things too. When I need to be." Clara looked into his steady gaze and realized she believed him completely. Clara made her decision. No more running, but rather to expose the family secrets. She and Lucas went to an abandoned factory, where her father had signed his final contract, to find evidence. Late at night, the sound of metal clanging echoed as shadows flooded in. Marco and his men appeared, eyes filled with hatred. "Clara, you must stay silent. If not, you'll die just like your father." Clara clutched the folder of documents, voice trembling. "You people killed him!" Guards rushed forward. Lucas sprang up, taking down the first with a single twist. "Try touching her and see." He growled each word, eyes blazing with fire. A brutal fight erupted, the sound of metal echoing throughout the factory. Clara was pulled down, documents scattered, photos of her father being followed flying everywhere. Marco grabbed the folder, but Lucas intercepted. The sound of breaking bone rang out sharply. Clara cried out, shouting, "I won't be silent anymore." She pulled out her phone, broadcasting a recording of Marco confessing his crimes. The guards froze, realizing everything had been recorded. Marco roared, then fled in desperation, leaving Clara gasping beside Lucas. The confrontation had been inevitable. Clara knew that once she committed to exposing the truth, her family would respond with lethal force. The abandoned factory was the perfect trap, or so Marco had thought. He'd underestimated Lucas's tactical training and Clara's determination. "You stupid girl," Marco had sneered as his men surrounded them. "You think you can bring down this family with some documents? We are the Morettis. We are untouchable." "No one is untouchable," Lucas had said calmly, positioning himself between Clara and the approaching guards. "Everyone bleeds the same." What followed was a masterclass in controlled violence. Lucas moved through Marco's men like a force of nature. Precise, efficient, devastating. Each strike was calculated to neutralize without killing, but the threat of lethal force was evident in every movement. Clara watched in awe and terror as this gentle father transformed into the warrior he'd once been. This was the man who'd survived impossible missions, who'd learned to fight in the world's deadliest conflicts. But Marco had come prepared. When the initial assault failed, he pulled a gun, aiming it directly at Clara. "Drop the documents, or she dies." "Your choice, soldier boy." Lucas froze, hands still raised in defensive position. For a moment, the warehouse was completely silent, except for Clara's ragged breathing. "Don't," Clara said. "Don't give them what they want because of me." "I'm not losing anyone else," Lucas replied, his voice carrying an edge of absolute finality. That's when Clara revealed her plan. She hadn't just been defending herself, she'd been recording everything. Her phone, connected to a hidden device, had been broadcasting the entire confrontation to a secure server. "It's over, Marco," she said, holding up the phone. "Everything you just said, everything you just did, it's all recorded. And in 10 minutes, if I don't enter a code, it automatically sends to every major news outlet in the country." Marco's face went from confusion to horror to rage in rapid succession. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Do you really want to risk it? The standoff stretched out, tension thick enough to cut. Marco's men looked to him for direction, unsure whether to escalate or retreat. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice carrying absolute authority. You've lost, Marco. The question is whether you lose quietly or loudly. Quietly, you might survive this. Loudly. He let the implication hang in the air. Marco's gun hand wavered. He looked at Clara, then at Lucas, then at his own men who were clearly having doubts about dying for a losing cause. This isn't over, Marco finally said, lowering his weapon. Yes, Clara replied. It is. After Marco and his men left, Clara collapsed against Lucas, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. Is it really over? She asked. The immediate threat? Yes, but there will be fallout. Legal battles, corporate warfare, probably attempts at character assassination. Can you handle that? Lucas looked at her seriously. Clara, I survived war zones. I can handle boardrooms and courtrooms. The question is, can you? Clara thought about Sophie's drawing, about the small apartment filled with love, about the life she'd glimpsed beyond corporate warfare. With you and Sophie, I think I can handle anything. They spent the rest of the night securing the evidence. Making multiple backups and contacting lawyers and journalists Lucas knew from his military days, people who specialized in exposing corruption. By dawn, the story was breaking across every news outlet. Moretti CEO exposes family murder plot dominated headlines. The scandal was massive, implicating not just Marco, but several other family members and business partners. Clara's phone rang constantly. Reporters, board members, family trying to control the narrative. She ignored them all. You okay? Lucas asked, watching her stare at the sunrise from the factory window. I just destroyed my entire family legacy in one night. But yeah, I think I'm okay. Regrets? Only one. I wish my father could have seen this, seen his daughter finally standing up for what's right. Lucas put his arm around her shoulders. I think he knows. When they finally returned to Lucas's apartment, Sophie was waiting with Lucas's neighbor, who'd been watching her. The little girl ran to her father, then surprised them both by also hugging Clara. You're safe, Sophie said. I was worried. We're all safe now, Clara assured her. That evening, as they sat around the small kitchen table eating takeout, Clara was too exhausted to cook, and Lucas's skills were limited to military rations. Sophie made an announcement. I'm going to draw a new picture. One with all of us together, because we're a real family now, right? Clara and Lucas exchanged glances, both understanding that Sophie had asked the question neither of them had dared to voice. Yeah, sweetheart, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. We're a real family now. Sophie beamed and immediately began drawing, while Clara and Lucas sat together, exhausted but triumphant, knowing they'd fought for something bigger than themselves. They'd fought for the truth, for justice, and for the future of the little girl who'd already claimed them both as her family. After the confrontation, Clara publicly released the evidence to the press, shocking the entire city. The corporate board was forced to return executive control to her. But Clara was no longer the cold CEO. She chose a different path. She started a foundation supporting orphans and families of fallen soldiers, a project her father had once dreamed of. Lucas helped her with security at community events, sometimes just standing in the background, silent and watchful. Sophie ran around during charity events, pulling Clara along to play. One day, Clara knelt to tie Sophie's shoes, and the child innocently said, "If you stay here, I'll have a mommy." Clara broke down crying. Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder. No need to rush. Just be genuine. The small apartment now had a new photo frame. Clara and Sophie smiling brightly together. They planted lavender together on the balcony, the wind carrying sweet fragrance into the room. Clara asked Lucas, "Weren't you afraid, daring to stand against the entire Moretti family?" He smiled faintly. "I'm only afraid of losing what's worth keeping." For the first time in her life, Clara felt protected, not by power, but by real love. The transformation wasn't immediate. The corporate board initially resisted her changes. Her family tried to paint her as unstable, and there were multiple legal battles to establish her father's murder as fact rather than conspiracy theory. But Clara had something she'd never had before, a support system that wasn't conditional on her success or compliance. Lucas became her constant shadow at public events, not as a romantic partner, but as protection. His presence deterred further physical threats, and his military bearing gave her credibility when facing skeptical journalists and hostile board members. You know, she told him after one particularly contentious board meeting, having a former Navy SEAL standing behind me definitely adds weight to my arguments. I just stand there. You do all the real work. Your presence matters more than you know. Sophie had become the unofficial mascot of Clara's foundation. Her artwork was featured on all their promotional materials, and she had a special talent for making donors smile with her unfiltered enthusiasm. Why do you help kids who don't have mommies and daddies? One donor asked Sophie during an event. Because Clara and Daddy taught me that families help families. Even if they're not the same family. The simple wisdom from a 6-year-old left the donor speechless and significantly increased his contribution. Clara's relationship with her remaining family was permanently fractured. Her mother had sided with Marco, choosing family loyalty over justice. Her younger cousins avoided her, fearing association would damage their own prospects. But Clara discovered she didn't miss them. The grief she felt was for what she'd never had, not what she'd lost. "Does it get easier?" she asked Lucas one evening as they worked together in the foundation office. "The loneliness of being cut off from everyone you knew?" Lucas looked up from the grant applications he was reviewing. "You're not alone. You have Sophie and me. You have the people you're helping. You have a purpose beyond profit. That's not what I asked." "I know, but it's the answer you need to hear." "Yes, it gets easier, but not because the loneliness fades. Because you realize you were lonely before, even when surrounded by family. Now you're alone but not lonely. There's a difference." Clara understood exactly what he meant. In her old life, she'd been surrounded by people but utterly isolated. Now, with just Lucas and Sophie and a few genuine friendships, she felt more connected than ever. One afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Clara found Lucas looking at old photos of his wife. "I hope I'm not intruding on her memory," Clara said carefully. Lucas set down the photo, a beautiful woman with Sophie's eyes smiling at the camera. "Sarah would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person was what they did when they had the power to choose cruelty or kindness. I chose cruelty for most of my life. I was a ruthless CEO, and then you chose differently. That's what matters." Clara sat beside him, studying the photo of the woman who'd loved Lucas and given him Sophie. "Tell me about her." "She was a pediatric nurse, believed in healing, in second chances, in the goodness of people even when they disappointed her. She made me believe I could be more than just a soldier." "What happened?" "Cancer, aggressive, fast. She fought hard, mostly because she didn't want to leave Sophie motherless. But in the end," his voice trailed off, "I'm sorry. Me too. But I have Sophie, and I have the life Sarah wanted for us. And now," he looked at Clara meaningfully, "now we have you." The inclusion in their family unit made Clara's throat tight. She'd never been chosen before. Not really. Always assigned a role, positioned strategically, valued for utility rather than herself. "I don't know how to be part of a family," she admitted. "Neither did I when Sophie was born. But you learn, one day at a time." That evening, as Clara helped Sophie with homework while Lucas prepared dinner, she realized she was learning. Learning what it meant to show up, not because it was strategic, but because people depended on you. Learning what it meant to love without calculating the return on investment. Learning finally what it meant to be home. One morning, sunlight streamed through the glass windows, golden dust particles dancing in the air. Clara brought out an apple pie she'd baked herself, the sweet scent of cinnamon filling the room. Sophie held up a new drawing. "Daddy, me, and Mommy Clara." Beneath it, scrawled words, "Home." Clara took it, tears streaming down her face, trembling as she smiled. On the table, she set down the old family ring, closing the box forever. "If you two still need me, I want to stay," Clara said softly. Lucas took out a wooden keychain shaped like an anchor and placed it in her hand. "Welcome home." Sophie hugged Clara tightly, laughter filling the entire apartment. On the balcony, lavender bloomed purple in the morning sun. Lucas watched the scene, whispering, "Family isn't where you're born, but where you choose." Clara nodded, smiling. "And I choose again, every day." The story ends here, but their journey has just begun. A small family in a corporation that now carries a human heart. 6 months after exposing her family's crimes, Clara had rebuilt the Moretti Corporation with entirely new principles. The board now included representatives from workers, community organizations, and her foundation. Marco was serving 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Her mother had moved to Italy, cutting off all contact. But Clara had gained something more valuable than family approval. She'd gained peace. The small apartment had become too cramped for their growing family, so they'd moved to a modest house near Sophie's school. Not a mansion, but a home with a yard where Sophie could play and a workshop where Lucas could teach her carpentry. "Look, Clara," Sophie called from the garden. "The apple tree has flowers." Clara joined her, marveling at the white blossoms that promised future fruit. They'd planted it together 6 months ago, a symbol of their new beginning. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Daddy says if we take care of it, we'll have apples next year. Can we make pie together?" "Absolutely, though you'll have to teach me. My first pie was mostly burned." Sophie giggled. "That's okay. Daddy's first pancakes were burned too. Now he's really good. You just need practice." Lucas appeared in the doorway, watching his two favorite people examine the apple tree. He'd never imagined his life could look like this. A daughter he adored, and a partner who'd chosen them despite having every reason to choose wealth and power instead. "Dinner's ready," he called. That evening, as they ate together, a simple meal of pasta and salad that Clara had successfully prepared, Sophie made her announcement. "I told my teacher that I have two parents now. She said I should draw a picture of our family for the school art show." Clara felt her eyes sting. "What will you draw?" "The truth. Daddy, you, me, and the apple tree, because we all grew together." After Sophie went to bed, Clara and Lucas sat on their small porch, looking at the stars. "Any regrets?" Lucas asked. "Not one. I gave up billions of dollars, a family legacy, social status, and I gained everything that actually matters." "Which is?" Clara gestured at the house where Sophie slept safely. "This. You, Sophie. The knowledge that I'm building something real instead of just managing something rotten. The foundation's making a real difference. Your father would be proud." "I hope so. I'm trying to honor what he believed in, not what his family became." Lucas took her hand. "Sarah used to say that the truest measure of a person is what they do with their second chances. You've used yours well. We've used ours well. Together." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other through violence and betrayal, but built something beautiful from the wreckage. Inside, Sophie's drawing was already pinned to the refrigerator. 3 figures standing under an apple tree with the word home written in her careful lettering. A family not bound by blood or obligation, but by choice. Daily, conscious, joyful choice. And that, they both knew, was the strongest bond of all. Final message. Family isn't where you're born, but where you choose, and choose again every day. If you believe healing stories like this deserve to be shared, please leave a comment and subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.